Alrighty, that was it. That was the little intro. Countdown, and then I can't actually use real Leonard Skinner music, so it's called Skinny Leonard. Close variation.
Right.
So, Greg, I appreciate you having the conversation with me.
You
Like I
bet.
said, kind of like a half an hour format. Basically, just getting to know you. And then later on, when you have your book, I would love to have you back on so we can talk more about that.
I'd love to be on. That'd be great.
But so, kind of give me like an overview. How'd you come to Christ? What Christ means to you.
You bet. Yeah, I mean, I oftentimes, when you're asked about your testimony or how you came to Christ, a lot of people are, hey, I'll tell you about the harsh life that I went through, and something bad happened, and then God took me through that, and I came to a relationship with Him. I have a different one. I mean, I was raised in a Christian family, and was one of those kids that at a very young age it made sense to me that I needed a Savior, and so I came to Christ at a young age, and was always just raised in the church, but always was a little bit different in terms of the way I went about my walk with Christ. For me, it wasn't just that this was a religion or it was a belief that my parents had and that they had passed on to me. It was a relationship that I wanted to develop, and so it was very different in that regard. A lot of people, when they saw me as a student or as a young adult, always were like, "Hey, wait a minute! You seem to have something different about your walk with God." And for me, it was always about not just learning Scripture or learning what I thought a good Christian was supposed to do. It really was about intimacy with God, and how do I develop an intimate walk and relationship with Him. So it was about being real with Him. So I kind of see myself a little bit like Paul, if you don't mind, from the standpoint not of his dramatic conversion, because he did have that big dramatic thing that happened, but I was probably one that I could have looked back and said, hey, if there was a Christian, yeah, I was raised in a Christian home. If I was active in the youth group, I was constantly at church, but was not just about reading the Bible. I was about knowing God, and I went early on mission trips and was really about how do I share the gospel with others. And so if anyone probably could pat themselves on the back and say, hey, from a Christian standpoint, I did it all right. Yeah, I probably have a reason to say yeah. In some ways, I think that's a bigger miracle that God has grabbed me and said, hey, wait a minute, it's not about any of that stuff. And that it's not about you, it's all about me. That He knocked me on the head early and said, hey, Greg, if it's about anything, it's about me. And you really have nothing to do with this other than you said yes. And so it's been an incredible ride for me to be able to walk in a relationship with God where I honestly feel like I have a conversation with Him every day. So,
No, I love that. So when you talked about doing missions work as a young child, did you feel God, or did you feel like this was something that you felt obligated to do, or when did you first feel God in the mission field?
I would say it was probably in elementary school and had nothing to do with going overseas or going anywhere. It was that early on in my life, God really impressed upon me that every person I came in touch with was a mission field, and that I needed to not only be looking for ways that I could be His hands and feet from the standpoint of expressing His love and allowing them to have an opportunity to maybe meet Him through me, uh, but that also I wanted to share the gospel with people. So I can remember doing that as young as in the first and second grade, of sharing with people the gospel, um, but doing it in a different way. I was never really pushy about it. I just wanted to say, hey, I've got this relationship with this God who loves me. Can I tell you about him? And just allow people to have the opportunity to meet him.
Mhm. I
So
find that interesting because you and I have two difference for growing up. Like I grew up in a Christian home where it was not a Christian home. Like we just had the big decorative Bible. You remember the big floral pattern ones that were like 3 feet wide and you would just slide it open? And
yeah,
it came out when somebody died. So I always love these conversations and interactions with people who grew up experiencing God from an early age.
yeah.
Um,
I remember my parents saying after church, they would say, "Hey, let's go to the nursing home." And we would go and visit in the nursing home. And I can remember distinctly relationships I had. There was a Mrs. Queen, I remember when I was probably in the third grade, who at the time was about almost 100 years old. And I can remember every month we would go and go to the nursing home, how thrilled I was. I looked forward to going because I wanted to see Mrs. Queen and I wanted to sit down with her. And I loved to sing the old rugged cross with her because I knew she loved that song. And it had nothing to do with my parents being there. It was because I wanted to go because I wanted to talk to Mrs. Queen. So, and I knew that God had an impact in her life when that happened. So anyway, yeah. Sorry, my wife's here too.
no, 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 that's all right.
Yeah.
Um, so my first ever mission trip was not till I was in high school,
Yeah.
and it was the girls across the street were homeschooled, and they were Bible believing Christians, and so naturally I'm a young boy, so I went to church for the girls. But when I went to this youth works thing, I felt so overwhelmed, like I'm sleeping on a classroom floor. We went to West Virginia, and in this particular area where the coal mines had shut down, they had gorgeous, beautiful homes, but there was no money. Everything that they had, their income and everything, was built up from the coal mines.
Hmm.
So when you talk about like God working within those different things, I just love it because I felt like that was the first time I had ever had that big connection that, hey, what I was doing helped people and it was from God.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. For me, probably the first major one, other than going on like choir trips and going to churches and singing or going to nursing homes or what have you, was I remember in high school going to a Navajo Indian reservation and us building a school there. And I can remember distinctly how while we were there to build
Mhm.
uh, this school, I can just remember God just impressing on my heart, Greg, that it's not about the building of the building, though. You need to take the time to stop and go and talk to the people. And so I remember not working at times and going and talking to these Indian families. I remember distinctly one of the women there making me flatbread, and just how much joy it brought her to be able to give to me. And it just struck me how all of us are connected, and all of us um, have this longing within each other for connection, and uh, and and just how beautiful it was to be able to have that moment with those people. So,
Mhm.
but I've often said that there's five means of growth for Christians. There's fellowship, there's worship, there's Bible study, there's prayer, and there's evangelism. And that many times people will start with fellowship because they're like, hey, I can be friends with these people. I can love with and we can get together
Mhm.
and have fun together. And what a joy that is. I can go and worship. I love to sing praises to God. I love the feeling, the atmosphere, the emotion of it, and all of that that can be there, plus that connection with God and knowing that you're giving Him a praise and worship. Bible study probably is the next thing that comes because people feel in some ways obligated sometimes. I need to spend time in God's Word because that way I can know Him better. And then prayer kind of comes after that because you feel like I should be talking to God. And evangelism's this last thing that you get to. And it's like, well, when I get the other four right, then I'll start doing this one. And I tell people all the time, I think you got to go the other direction because God touched your heart. And wherever you are right now, there is someone out there that is in that same position that if you'll go, or that needs to hear what you have right now. And if you'll go and share, then suddenly what you'll see is God is going to work in and through and by you to someone else. So suddenly now you get to see God actually at work in your life. The rest of it can just be something that you do and study and all that. It becomes academic and all of that. But it's different when you're out there and you talk to someone and suddenly you see God doing stuff and breaking down walls in ways that you're like, I had no idea where that came from. And you're just like, wow, God, you did something great. Because what then happens is you go from evangelism back to prayer. You say, God, it wasn't about me. Let me talk to you more and get you involved. Then you say, let me read my Bible more because I just want to make sure that it's not me talking, but you talking, and me make sure my words are matching what you would want. And then you get to worship, and it's not us worshiping because of what Calvin or Martin Luther said or worshipped in some song he wrote. Is because I'm worshiping him for something I saw him do yesterday, not something that happened 120 years ago that someone else wrote about. And then when we fellowship, we get together and it's us not saying, hey, wow, let's talk about the football and the NCAA tournament and all that. It's, hey, what's going on in your life? What did God do yesterday in your life? The depth comes when you step out and let God show himself in reality. And that I think happens when you do evangelism.
That's very cool. That brings me to another interesting question, something we didn't hit yet, but you do a lot of artwork as far as like the sidewalk art and
Yes.
so what kind of, because I know like I saw this you flashed across the news screen, even in here in Ohio, I saw it through CNN. What kind of inspired you to do that?
We had COVID going on, and my wife and I were looking for something to do because we're in quarantine. And so we were cleaning the garage, and I ran across a bucket of our kids' chalk that we hadn't used. Our kids are kind of grown up now. And I was just like, okay, well, I think I'll go draw something. And I picked out one famous artist painting. I think it's a day on the beach or a day in the park. I can't remember who actually did it. But so I did that piece, and someone came by and said, wow, that's some really bad chalk you have. Let me get you some good chalk. And they came and brought me that. And so I kind of redid the painting. And suddenly people started coming by and saying, wow, that's awesome. Will you do some more? They started dropping off pictures they wanted me to do in our mailbox. And one thing led to another, and it got to Easter, and I thought, well, let me go ahead and put something about Easter. So I did the Easter week on my front drive on the front walk in front of our house. And before I knew it, we had 300 people a day coming and looking at the art, and news media outlets calling and saying, could we do shows on it? I think one lady had put it on Facebook, and it was viewed 1.5 million times and shared 87 or 88,000 times. And so after that, then everyone just started coming by and wanting to see what I was doing. So every day I would do some new piece out on the front porch or out on the front sidewalk. And for me, it was an opportunity to, here's all my neighbors. People actually came from an hour away to see stuff. And I would share the gospel with them while I was out there. It just for me was a chance for me to connect with people and to have another opportunity to share something with Jesus with them about Jesus. So it's been an incredible ministry, and we're getting towards Easter now, and I've got people coming by and saying, are you going to do something again for so yeah, we actually during COVID had people come and do their church out in front of our house looking at the Easter art that was there because they didn't have church at the time they could go to. It was wild.
Now, if I remember from a previous conversation, you were watching, was it Bob Ross painting, and you were like,
Yeah.
hey, this guy's making it simple and I think I can do this too.
Yeah.
Is that kind of what sparked your interest?
Yeah, I started art was it's kind of happened over time. I had watched Bob Ross for about 2 years after coming home from work and just thought, well, he says I can do it, so I guess I'll just go get the stuff and try it. And I remember my first painting was horrid, but it was enough fun for me that I thought, okay, well, maybe I'll stick with this a little bit. What really happened though with my art was that my son, I had been coaching his ball teams, and he decided that he wanted to go into some sports that I wasn't going to be able to coach. And I was like, how am I going to relate to my son? This is where I thought I would have my conversations with him most often. And he was in an art class at his school. And so he would come home with a sketch that he was supposed to do for art. And I just said, hey, I'll do the art sketch with you. Let's do it and then we'll talk about it. So every day he'd get a homework assignment. I'd do his homework assignment with him. And suddenly it became something that I fell in love with. And when my younger son then went into drama, they started asking me, hey, would you come and build sets, help us build sets? Well, before I knew it, I was the one that was designing them for them and painting them. And so anyway, it just kind of took off. But it really was,
Mhm.
yeah, Bob Ross sparked an interest in me. But then wanting to have a relationship with my kids is what sparked me to continue.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And then I find a lot of things about you fascinating. Like we're good friends. We've had lots of chats.
Yeah.
Um, could make this probably go for hours, but we will stop it at the 30-minute mark to honor your time today for sure. Um, you had mentioned to me that every year for Christmas you had wrote a letter,
Yeah.
and the letter was like from a father's perspective to his children.
Yeah.
Can you kind of maybe go into that for just a little bit?
Yeah, my oldest is now 23, going on 24. So every year since his first year when he was born, I wrote something called The Father's Look at Christmas. And it was intended to be, hey, here I am as the father of my son who's now less than one, you know. I wonder what God was thinking when he looked at his son, Jesus, at that time. And so I would go back and kind of study and look and think, okay, what am I looking at? What might God have been thinking as he was looking at Jesus and at that same age? And tried to find things in the Bible that maybe correlated. And, you know, obviously there's big skips and jumps in terms of the life of Jesus and what's expressed in the Bible. But every year I would just sit down and say, God, talk to me. What did you think as you were thinking about Jesus at this age? And so every year there's been something different that God has given me from a perspective to say, hey, yeah, this is where you are. This is what I was thinking. And so I just write about that. And it's turned into this Christmas letter. I've got, I don't know even know how many people at this point that ask me just to include them on that writing. Um, but it's going to be one that when I get to 25 days, of 25 years of it, then I'm going to compile all of those and make that available as a book so that people can walk through from one father's perspective, hopefully, what another father was thinking about his son, about Jesus. But God just using my own boys in my life to speak to me about him and his relationship with his son.
Mm. Now, how has it been during the pandemic? You know, fellowship. You know, a lot of us are isolated inside. I think a lot of us are more on phone calls now with other people than
Yeah.
ever before. But how have you guys related to that?
You know, it's been hard in some ways. For I had started a new job, so I'll say that, and that was difficult. I'm the CEO of an online education company that does things written from a biblical worldview, and it's been hard to come into a company where you're supposed to lead and set vision and that kind of thing, where you're trying to do that online. So in some ways it's been difficult. In other ways, I can tell you that while last year was a hard reality, in some ways it was, we've had such blessings during it. I was on the news 3 times where they came out to my house and filmed us because of the art stuff. Um, my boys and I have spent more time together because it's just been us, and uh, and so I mean I took my guitar out on our front patio and I would play guitar, and people would stop for it or for the art. And so I got to know my neighbors in ways that I've never known them before. So in some ways, while it was a rough time, it was also probably a time where I connected even better with people than I ever had, especially in our neighborhood. So um, it was kind of unique in that way.
No, that's very cool. Um, and I guess we won't touch on it too much, but there is an elephant in the room. You do have a book coming out soon.
Right.
Would you like to just mention just a little bit about the book and when we can possibly expect it?
Oh, you bet. Yeah. It's going to be called Created Celestial Beings. It's the first book we believe that's going to be in a 6-book series. And it's one that actually came out of a discussion I had with a friend of mine who was in my Sunday school class. This is going back about 15 years ago or so. And I had run into him my first time on Facebook. I'd gone out there and I saw him writing some things about creation. And I was like, oh, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right. And so I kind of responded to something he was writing. Little did I know, during the time that he had left our Sunday school and we'd moved away and come back, he'd become an atheist. And so he tagged me. I had no idea what tagging was. And all of a sudden, out of the woodwork were all these other atheists that were challenging me on my faith. I think this was back in the early 2011, 2012, something along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
And I just said, hey, wait, I've been studying this since 1993. Let me go ahead and I'll share. I won't mind talking to anyone. I believe truth can stand up to scrutiny. And if it can't, then it's probably not truth. So you should want to be open to testing and expressing what you believe and challenging everything. So anyway, I had this conversation with him and what turned out to be about 100 other atheists. And as I shared what I normally share with intellectual design or with creation science and different things that I'd come up with over the years, it just struck me after 4 months, there's no way that this is convincing to the folks I'm talking to. I don't see any of them coming around as atheists based on what I'm sharing. And I just stopped and I do what I always do when I'm on a mission, in a mission field. I say, God, what do you want to say? It's not about what I want to say. You tell me what I'm supposed to say. And I just felt the overwhelming compulsion that I needed to meet them where they were and to listen to what they said and not argue with them about what they believed the data showed and what they saw in observation and all that, but rather to say, hey, Greg, just tell them, hey, let's just say you're right. What's the possibility that what you're saying, and when you ask for evidence, that the evidence that you're talking to or talking about is the evidence that you're looking for the veracity of the Bible? And so I went to the Bible and I started looking at it and saying, okay, wait a minute, is it possible it could be saying something along those lines? And I started going back to the original language. And as I did, it started challenging me in saying, wait a minute, is it possible that what they're saying is actually what the Bible is saying? And instead of coming about it at from the standpoint of, oh, I was wrong in what I believed before and that they're right, what I said was, wait a minute, I can't prove it one way or the other for sure. But let me just talk to them just like God was telling me to. Let's just say, hey, you're right, atheist. What if the Bible told you that? What would you do with the God of the Bible? And what I found was that there are many atheists that would say, okay, wait a minute. If that's really what the Bible's saying, I know the Bible's not all about creation. Tell me what the rest of it's about. And I would get to share the gospel with them. Because let's talk about, if I was to mention to you age of the universe, if it's 6,000 years, if the earth is 6,000 years old and, or it's 4.6 billion years old, regardless, I could look at the Bible and see how, regardless of how old it was, we all met at the feet of the cross. And that the cross was what it was all about. So if this was a speed bump for an atheist coming to Christ in terms of the way that things were stated in creation, as Paul would say, I would become all things to all people in order that some might come to Christ. And so I just decided I was not going to be dogmatic on certain things about creation. And so I started to look at the Bible differently in that regard. Interestingly, I took this idea that I had for a story to Jerry Jenkins, who wrote the Left Behind series. And I presented it to him and I said, would you write it for me? Because I have never written anything in my life like that. And he told me, Greg, he was in the middle of writing books about the disciples at the time. He said, Greg, I can't do this for you, but I tell you what, I think it will sell. And I think it's a great idea of a way to approach people. Let me take you to Chris Fabry, who wrote the children's version of Left Behind. He's on Moody Bible Radio and has written like 113 different books. And the two of them together kind of beat up on me and said, Greg, you know what? God gave you this message. You need to be the one to tell it. And so I set off on this mission of, okay, then God, every night I'm going to spend some time writing some of this. And at this point, I've written about 1,700, 1,800 pages. We've broken it down. That's the better part of 3 books. And then I've got 3 more that are in my head. But in essence, what the first one does is it looks and says, if creation started, there had to be a reason why God did it. And the first thing that he created that had free will was the angels. And it seems so illogical for a God who's omniscient, who is perfect in every way, to create something that has free will when he knows that that thing is going to rebel against him, and many of them are going to end up in a place like hell. How can a perfectly loving God, perfectly compassionate, when he knows that's going to be the end in advance, why in the world would he follow through on it? And I started just asking the question, why, and spent about 3 years just thinking about that question and talking to God about it. And what this first book is basically what fell out of that 3-year discussion with God. And it's done in a fictional storyline like the Left Behind series, written from an angel's perspective, an angel who actually was mentored by Satan prior to the fall. So you get to see why Satan fell, why there was the rebellion, and why God went about creating these first angels. So anyway, that's what the first book's about.
No, that sounds good. I think because we're at the 28-minute mark, we'll begin starting to wrap some things up.
I will tell
Greg,
you,
go on.
April, let me just say, is what the public.
April.
So next month.
Okay. So when it does come out, I need to buy a copy. I'll read it, and then we'll bring you back on, and then we can discuss the book again. No, I appreciate you being my first official guest in these like half an hour interview slots, Greg. Tomorrow, I believe I'm going to have a pastor friend of mine, an amazing gentleman by the name of Brad Kittle on. The two of you should meet at some point. I think you guys would just the infectious nature of him and you, I think, would just make the world explode and probably end 2021.
Awesome.
Do you have any final thoughts, Greg, before I kick this outro?
No, other than what I always say is there's a God who loves us, and that God knew that we needed him, and that he did what it took in order for us to have a relationship with him, and he did it with what he did on the cross. And I just ultimately believe that if people will meet him, not necessarily the Christian religion, but if they'll meet Christ and meet him, that it will transform a life. So I just encourage people, if they don't know him, to seek him or to talk to someone who knows him and see if they can maybe introduce him. So that's it. That's all I would say.
I can't add anything to that, so I'll kick on that intro or outro.
Thank you, Ben.